Hi, copywriters. I was going to start off my talk by saying that I felt like an infiltrator as a strategist, but actually I started thinking that seems pretty good. Word of the day, women of the day, or are you all going to steal my job? I would be fine with that. So yeah, I'm a strategy director at BBH, and I'm also the diversity lead. So about a year ago, they asked me to do some more projects to make us a more diverse place and to make sure that our advertising was more inclusive. And so I'm talking about how those two roles come together today. So I'll start out with a quote from one of the founding fathers of advertising, or the founding father of advertising, Bill Bernbach, about insights and about human insights. Because actually, I think specifically talking to a room of writers, you'll know more than anyone that it's the insights that make up the wonderful moments in writing, the metaphors, the similes, the nods of recognition and the laughter. They all come from insights. But also, all ads start from an insight, or at least they should. And thank you, Nick, for validating that it's good to have a brief, because otherwise you just go to humour. The wireless network appears to have been compromised.
That's annoying, isn't it?
So I really love insights. And I do something a bit unusual in the field of diversity, which is that I apply insights to diversity and think about how... Ooh.
You're doing really well.
Thanks. Shall I just spacebar my way through this? I'm going to spacebar my way through this. I apply insights to the area of diversity. So I'm sure that everybody who works in the industry has heard a lot of conversation about diversity. Sometimes people say to me, diversity is very fashionable now. Something that I'm quite uncomfortable with. I really don't like the word femvertising. I don't like the fact that we've become really cynical about diversity. But the reason that we've become so cynical is because there's a lot of chat and not that much action. And also, a lot of the solutions that people propose aren't really solutions. They're not really viable. And not all brands need a purpose ad all the time. So I apply insights to why we're not always very good at driving diversity, and therefore what we can do to change that. So I do the very complicated process that is the secret mastery of strategy. So this is an industry secret I'm revealing to you right now. We take a problem and we look for a solution, and we put an insight in the middle of it. So again, I really love insights for that reason. So one of the things that I started thinking about was that diversity as a word kind of ghettoizes itself. It pushes itself into a binary, and it acts as though it's not for everyone. It doesn't come across as ingenuous when a company talks to you about their ability policy to allow people of all physical abilities in through their doors if they don't have any. And obviously, also, as an industry, we're 88% white. We've got a problem with the level of female creative directors at the top. And so this word, diversity, even if you're not sort of anti-diversity, I don't think very many people are, it sort of says there's a group of people over here who really care about this thing, and some of them represent it as well, and we can just sort of get on because they're doing that over there. And every now and then we'll make a purpose ad. And actually, that's a problem. So the word diversity in itself is a problem. So when I was asked to start doing work around diversity, I sort of thought about that quite a lot. Because, so now I'm taking my talk and I'm trying to bring it back to language. Because the thing about that word is that you immediately have a reaction to it. It stereotypes itself. So what I've done is I've gone on a journey throughout the whole advertising process, and I've picked off little things that we can do and little problems that are contributing to the problem. And when it comes to the area of language, we've got a problem in that we are failing to recognize the difference between stereotypes and insights. So I'm sure all of you know the difference between stereotypes and insights, but there is a similarity between stereotypes and insights. So if you look at this stereotype, feminists are angry. And this insight, which was my first insight working on my insight-led equality initiatives, which is equality is for everyone, your brains will react to both of those quite immediately. But it will take your brain slightly longer. If I had my special strategic neuroscience high-tech wires on your brains and was looking at your signals lighting up, they would light up faster when you looked at feminists are angry than they would when you looked at equality is for everyone. And the reason for that is, even though I hope that you disagree with this, you will recognize it. So you recognize that stereotype. You've been fed that stereotype by society for years and years and years. You've probably come across some angry feminists, come across some less angry feminists. You might be like, I don't know what feminism is. Feminism is for everyone. But you will have responded to that set of words faster than the set of words equality is for everyone. So recognition and immediate recognition is something that I think about as a strategist a lot of the time. I think about how quickly people respond to things, because that's what we need to do when we create an ad or write a good headline. And the sad thing is we respond much faster because our brains are lazy fundamentally. We're not lazy, but our brains are. So I thought a little bit about the difference in recognition of this and this. And the best thing I've come up with is that when you recognize this, it's like recognizing the moment where your drunk uncle has had one too many drinks at the Christmas party and is about to start saying things that you don't want to hear, and so you extract yourself. And the difference between recognizing that is like seeing someone across a bar who is a stranger and really fancying them. So do you see what I mean? The difference in the moment of recognition is different. And one of them is more familiar than the other. So that being one of the problems, the first thing I did was I went back to the people who asked me to do some equality initiatives, and I said, diversity initiatives, and I said, actually, we need to call this equality, because equality is for everyone, and we need to find ways for everyone to get involved in the equality work that we do, which means, for example, talking to copywriters about what they can do within the world of copywriting, and talking to legal teams about what they can do in the world of legal, because sometimes it's illegal to, for example, say that we want to hire more female creative directors, and we need to change that. So I've been speaking to every single discipline, and this is the way that I am talking to copywriters. So let's go a little bit deeper to think about the problem. Why are we so addicted to stereotypes as an industry? We have a really, really unhealthy addiction to them. And the answer is that our processes from the beginning of when advertising was conceived of are full of stereotypes. So the definition of a segmentation might be a fixed but widely held view of a simplified group of images, people, or things. That's actually the dictionary definition of a stereotype. But it sounds like the definition of a segmentation, right? So when I take a brief from a client and I'm going to start writing the client brief, it might start with mums are, or we need to talk to mums in a different way. And so that's something that we very quickly need to just correct to parents, or at a higher level, humans, or humans who care about younger humans. You can get very abstract very quickly, but sometimes that helps. So segmentations, problem with stereotyping. Aspiration, huge problem with stereotyping, because the way that people used to teach advertising in the mid-century was that you needed to associate your product with the lifestyle of a very small group of people who were richer than the people you were trying to sell the product to. And we still fall into that trap. And actually, the learnings that we've taken from the decades that we've been doing advertising now is that doesn't actually work. We're just making people feel very insecure a lot of the time. So there's lots of studies that have been done on the problem, and I'm not going to dwell on the problem too much, but I'll just give you my favourite statistics. So Unilever have done a lot of work around stereotypes, and they've done an Unstereotype initiative and a big piece of research which came out about a year and a half ago. And they started out by looking into the issue around gender. And their research showed that 1% of ads portrayed women as funny, 1% portrayed women as intelligent, 2% portrayed women as funny, and 3% portrayed women as leaders. Which I think is extraordinary, and is also kind of ironic when you think about the fact that also the 3% conference was founded because at the time of its founding, which was under a decade ago, only 3% of creative directors worldwide were women. So for our ads to then be reflecting that accurately is quite extraordinary. And that's why, as a result, it's little wonder that 40% of women don't identify with the women they see in advertising at all. And 30% of women feel that ads portray women as seen by men. And technically, that must on some level just be true, because that 97% of people who are the creative directors, and these days it's 11%, so 89% of creative directors are men, they are creatively directing. And also, how can we really expect them not to portray women as perceived by men? Or how can we help them to really understand the full picture of what women are like and what we care about and what we think, when it's much faster to recognize a stereotype than an insight when it comes to something that you aren't. So that's also partly what I'm trying to do, because the answer isn't fire everyone immediately and start again. That would be a really difficult thing to do, and a lot of the creative directors who are in those roles, have grown their careers in the best possible way and deserve them. It's just that there's a lot of women out there who deserve them too. So we just need to help everyone and help each other to help each other. Another one of my favorite statistics about this is from a big study that was done in the States, which I think shows us the root of the problem, which is that when exposing children to 2 hours of television, the self-esteem of little white boys went up, and the self-esteem of black boys and girls of both races went down. So what we're really talking about is people's sort of normative associations. And I work very closely with a woman called Selma Nichols, who runs a diverse casting agency called Looks Like Me, who tells this story much better than I do, because she relates it back to her daughter saying, "Mummy, why don't the women in the adverts look like me?" And so basically it's not just about stereotyping, it's also about exclusion. Now, all of the industries in the world are focusing a lot on these issues at the moment, but advertising is a little bit different because we are responsible for having created the issues. The media tells you what normal looks like, and therefore you take that away and you grow up working in the media and you perpetuate it. So we are the cycle of exclusion, the cycle of stereotyping, we've kind of created that. But that's great as well, because it means that we're in a position of power where we can reverse it again. So awareness, that's how we reverse it. And awareness particularly around language, because the reason that I'm also feeling really good about talking to a room full of copywriters and people who work with language about this is that language is an equalizer. So we can't become more diverse than we are as an individual. I can't become more diverse than I am or fulfill diversity criteria that I don't own. But I can use language differently and respond to language differently and question things differently as a result of my understanding of language. So awareness is a really important thing. Show of hands, who is familiar with this riddle? Yeah, so a lot of you are familiar with this riddle. For those of you who are familiar, bear with me, I'm not making the point that you think I am. For those of you who aren't familiar with this riddle, take a moment, try and work out who the surgeon is, how this is possible. So, the answer to the riddle is that the surgeon is the mother, and when you do statistical analysis on this riddle, you get to 86% of people getting it wrong. So 86% of people don't conceive that the surgeon could be a woman. And this riddle is often used in unconscious bias training and basically used to help us to self-flagellate about how sexist we are, even to ourselves, because the women don't get it either, and to sort of go away from the whole experience going, God, I'm a really awful person. But actually, that's a lot of masculine words, isn't it? In fact, it's 7 masculine words and 1 tiny little gender-neutral word. So the riddle is patriarchal, and the riddle is being sexist against itself. right? So I changed it. So I changed the riddle and reversed years of the patriarchal reign that the riddle has had on the people. I told you I was making things happen. And I also put it out in a survey and did some statistical analysis on it. And it's really interesting because 62% of people got it right. So we went from 14% of people getting it right to 62% of people getting it right when we gave them a chance. And that's a big point here, because in the same way as I've reframed diversity to equality because equality is for everyone, we also need to do a little bit less finger wagging. We do need to do some finger wagging, but a little bit less finger wagging in general, because we need to give everyone a chance, because otherwise we're telling people that they're not going to succeed before they've even started trying. And actually, this is the way to get to pragmatic change. It's to bring everyone with you on the journey. So it was really fun doing this within my agency, because all the people who felt a little bit sore after unconscious bias training felt a little bit better about themselves. And many got in contact asking how they could support the project. And this is because we are so hardwired for language. So in the same way as what I was saying about how you recognize a stereotype immediately, language makes images and creates emotions in our heads within microseconds. Before we've even really processed what we're talking about. Language is a system 1 response. You will know that strategists like talking about system 1 and system 2. But language is a system 1 response, so it's a almost unconscious response, whereas system 2, you've processed it and you're responding to it rationally. And the best ads are all system 1 responses too, but every single word elicits one. So really, there's a big question going on at the moment about what we can do. I think the answer is awareness, but the industry is asking whether we need better guidance. How many people are familiar with the Bechdel test? Yay! So the Bechdel test is a really amazing idea because it's so simple. So it was come up with by a woman in 1982. Her name was Alison Bechdel, and she did some analysis on films initially that were popular. And these days, about 50% of films pass the Bechdel test. And a lot of films that deal with really interesting and complex issues still don't pass the Bechdel test. But the Bechdel test is, if you haven't read the slide, it's the criteria to pass it is for a woman and another woman to have a conversation about anything that isn't a man. Because so many protagonists are male through history, and so therefore that doesn't happen in films. But I think that's a really interesting thing, because I started thinking about this and thinking, what's the advertising equivalent of the Bechdel test? And the answer is we can't have anything this simple, because we might have 30 seconds or one poster to land something. And whereas if you've got 2 hours, you can definitely fit it in, which probably isn't the right approach to passing the Bechdel test, but A for effort for all of this, right? So the Advertising Standards Authority have released a report saying that they might rule on gender stereotyping in 2018. And actually, this started out as a very long-winded response to Are You Beach Body Ready and that ad and the controversy that it caused. Because when that ad went out and they received over 400 complaints, which is much, much more complaints than you usually receive, and I can vouch for that because my account is Virgin Media, and telcos are famous for having the most ASA complaints, but we usually have trouble after about 12. So 400 is quite a lot. But they went, well, this isn't illegal. It's really difficult for us to say that this is illegal. We're a legal body. So we're going to do some research and publish it a year later, and then maybe rule in 2018. And yes, I'm holding them to, taking them to account for that, because I do think that we do need some rules, but you can see that it's very complicated what those rules might be. I mean, in this instance, it's not that complicated because it's bad to encourage teenagers to be anorexic. and maybe making that illegal would be good. But the rules in general, and the rules, I'm talking mostly about gender today, but actually we have to think about everything. We have to think about gender, race, size, class, age, everything, inclusion. And so it is difficult to create a single set of rules for that. But legal bodies like the ASA will at some point need to. So awareness, guidance. There's a lot of chat about what not to do. I think it's really easy to talk about what not to do. I could have done a whole presentation about, with other examples like Beachbody Ready, and just show you all of the things not to do. But not that many people are talking about how not to do it, and not that many people are talking about what to do. So now a little bit more of how. And communication is a really important part of how, because we need to have bigger, more open and more generous conversations about this in order to all be on the same page. So imagine my joy at this email that went around the agency shortly after the unconscious bias training workshop. So this was sent by a male strategy director who was working on a brief, and he's looking into a scenario which also involves a surgeon. How wonderful is that? So his question is, he's asking you to imagine this scenario. So the scenario is an ad casts a woman as a surgeon, a job that would usually have a man cast in that role, but the surgeon in the ad makes a mistake, so she's about to amputate the wrong leg. The ad is lighthearted, nothing actually goes wrong, so then his question is, which of the following do you think? Well done, that brand, for using a non-stereotypical portrayal of a surgeon, even if she is the butt of a joke. Typical, the only time a woman is shown professional capacity, she's being incompetent or something else. And these are the statistical responses down the right-hand side. So 24% thought well done, 62% thought typical, 14% thought something else. 75% of women answered B. So of all female respondents, 75% said no, inclusion in that context is wrong. And so this is sort of a really good way of bringing to life how difficult it really is for a body like the ASA to get this right, because I agree that inclusion is wrong in that context, but it's because there isn't a precedent. It's because we haven't seen lots of gender-neutral ads for a really long time that aren't making a point about being empowered because you've got great hair, and replacing one set of stereotypes, a woman should be a homekeeper and perfect and really good at washing up, with another, the empowerment, great hair, be a boss ones. We just need some like normal portrayals of women being normal, selling products just in a casting sense, and then we can have female surgeons getting it wrong because no one would notice. And the thing about your brain being lazy and immediately recognizing something is that we often have a conversation when we're including a different person from what we would usually include with an ad, which is, does it become the idea? And I think the worry in this instance is that the female surgeon getting it wrong becomes the idea. But if it was just the female surgeon, would that become the idea? Is that ad then a purpose ad? The answer is it shouldn't be, and if we make more ads with women being surgeons in them, then it will stop being. We have to create that change, and we have to be brave enough to create that change. So Unilever's on stereotype research, which really is wonderful, they give some guidance, but there's lots of different points of guidance. I think for me this is the most practical one, but I'd like to sort of tag that with Unilever 2017, and then I'd like to throw it away in 2020 when we don't need it anymore. So sensitivity is another thing that we can do. So this is just a little anecdote that I'd like to share from a woman who works in tech. So she actually runs an e-sport company, and she reached out to me and asked me to share some of my methodologies with her because her working environment is predominantly male, and so she was finding it really difficult to bring the women up within it and to get them to be heard more and to get them to speak up. And she was often hiring women who were really sort of forthright in the interview, and then was like, where have you gone in the room? And she shares this really lovely anecdote about a meme that was created to advertise one of the esports, and it just said, hey, you guys. And this woman said, well, I have to say, actually, I don't relate to that. And I really like this anecdote because so often in agency world, we're like, hey guys. And that happens because of actually trying to fit in many instances, because you're trying to fit in with a certain kind of conversation. But she challenged the guy and she said, actually, I don't relate to being a guy. And he said, well, I see you as one of the guys. And she said, do you? And he said, maybe not. And he went back on it. And so I think, again, awareness, but also calling it out, but doing it in a generous way and going, this is normal. It sounds normal to us, but actually I feel excluded. So awareness of yourself within that situation is another thing that we can all do. Because I think what this all comes down to is generosity. So being generous with ourselves, acknowledging that a big part of the problems that we're up against come from our history. They don't necessarily come from our present. And being generous enough to be open enough that we can get things wrong. And actually one of the hardest things to do this with is race, because we are very, very white. I am currently looking at a sea of very, very white faces. And so being generous to ourselves means educating ourselves, but it also means not always being too afraid of saying anything for fear of getting it wrong. So I am encouraging everybody to read this book, which is it's called Why I No Longer Talk to White People About Race by Renée Edo-Lodge. And it's brilliant because she's actually very generous. The title sounds like this book is not for white people, but it's quite deliberately a provocation because she educates us on the structural reasons why racism is still so prevalent, and for people who don't necessarily identify with it or see it or notice it because they haven't personally been excluded and they don't feel like they have excluded anyone. It's really, really useful because it's really educational and it just helps you go, okay, we haven't come as far as we thought we'd come. But language, that is the other thing that we can all do as individuals in our agencies. We all need to get better at talking about race because we need to feel comfortable saying, we haven't cast any black people in this ad. And when I talk about this in my agency, I get people saying, are we allowed to say black people? Yes, we're allowed to say black people, and the ideal thing to say is people of colour because we've excluded that group historically, but we tend to say BAME because the BBC says that it's okay to say BAME, and so it's sort of a comfort zone, but actually it sounds like a bit of a cop-out, and I think if you're sitting there as somebody who feels excluded, it's very difficult to relate to an acronym. You don't feel like people are talking about you, so we all need to get better at talking about race as part of it. So what this comes down to is you guys are the writers, you own the language, and it's language that will liberate us because language is an equalizer. So we can't be more diverse, but we can use more diverse language. And it's that diverse language that will get us to equality. So I'm just going to come back to the Bill Bernbach quote that I started out with. Now, I'm not actually an editor, so I'm sure that if I had edited anyone's copy in such a poor, haphazard fashion that they wouldn't be that happy with me. But points for anyone who noticed quite how gendered Bill Bernbach's quote that I started out with was about, ironically, an insight into human nature. So I've just done a little editing work there. But in reality, this is relevant, I promise. In reality, editing, reframing a very male-oriented history with a female one, like my editing work there was a joke. I don't think that we should replace man with women. The answer isn't binary. It plays within the edges, and I think we need to be more inspired by businesses that are doing this a little bit better than us. So businesses like Amazon Prime and Netflix who have managed to collect together a much more equal body of storytelling. Because a piece of work like this isn't actually about a trans person. There's no trans insight at the center of this narrative. This is an insight about parenthood. Told in a context that anyone can relate to, because if you're trans, you can relate to it, and that's so exciting because you haven't seen that kind of story be told before. But if you're not, you really see the purity of parenthood being told in that story. And I think that's what we need to aspire towards. Thank you.